Welcome to Latte with a Lawyer, a podcast dedicated to bringing you the stories of some of America's most successful lawyers, figuring out what makes them tick, how they creatively solve problems, and how others aspiring to be them can follow in their footsteps.
Okay, good afternoon, guys. Welcome to another episode of Latte with a Lawyer. We've got Jeff O'Brien from Chestnut Cambron in Minneapolis. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So I know it's are we still morning? It is still morning.
It is still morning. Yeah.
Central time. So what's your what gets you going in the morning? What's your favorite beverage of choice?
Well, of course, anything caffeinated. But if I had to pick one type of beverage, I tend to be partial to a whole milk latte for whatever reason. It's just tend to like that one. But if I'm at a meeting and whatever is, if it's coffee, it's coffee, right? I was at my networking group last week, and there was something in a pot that had grounds and stuff, and I'm like, it's coffee and it's 7:30 in the morning, I'll take it. So can't be choosy sometimes. But no, my go juice is a whole milk latte.
Excellent. You're perfect. Then we got a good match here, since it's Latte with a Lawyer and you're a lawyer.
Yep.
Excellent. Good stuff. So tell everybody about what kind of work you do, what your practice is.
So I do mainly transactional work. I've done a lot of stuff over the years. I've been practicing now for over 21 years.
Okay.
But these days I'm doing a lot. I kind of keep myself in the lanes of corporate and real estate law. And on the corporate side, I am outside general counsel to small and closely held companies. And that includes, helping them get started in some cases. Day-to-day representation could be contract drafting, could be helping with their trademarks and other intellectual property issues. It could be helping raise money, do a lot of private securities, purchasing and selling businesses, doing all those kinds of things. And on the real estate side, pretty much everything. Here in Minnesota, we have a real property law certification that we can get from our state bar association. And back in 2008, I sat for the test, qualified to sit for the test, took the test, and I've been certified as a real property law specialist ever since. So in that case, it's everything under the sun. And I used to do more stuff in court, but these days, it's nice to have a team of people working with me that I can send them to court, and I keep going with the deals, because there's a lot of deals going on right now.
Or are there?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. You'd think with all the kind of the uncertainty in the world and in the economy that you might see kind of a slowdown, but no, my clients are as busy as they were a couple of years ago, even pre-pandemic.
No kidding. So you're actually a leading indicator then. That's interesting to hear. Because you get sort of consumed by the big media news, but you're right. There's always stuff happening, people taking advantage of the environment, opportunities.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What was I going to say to you? Oh, so you mentioned court. Wait, so when you say go to court, what does that mean? What kind of work? Bench trials?
Well, if I was doing something, usually it was on the real estate side, and it could be it's kind of what I refer to as process litigation.
Okay.
So it could be, a quiet title action or an eviction action, or in Minnesota here, we have two systems of land registration. There's abstract, and then we have what we call our Torrens system, which is based on the system that for registering ships, where you transfer property, you have a certificate of title versus always having to go back to the abstract. And so sometimes there are situations when you have we call it a Torrens property, there are things that have to be done, like title cleanup, let's say after a foreclosure when somebody else now owns it. Or you can, if there's some issues with a title, you can use registration as a way of clearing those things up. So that's all done through our court system here. So that's why I refer to as process litigation. It's boring, and I would say a litigator would look at this and say it's kind of boring, but for real estate lawyers, this is how sometimes there are some things that you can only clean up using a court order, and so we have to go to court.
I see. And again, you're not going, that's not in front of a jury. You're sitting with a judge, right?
Exactly. In some cases, so in some, with our Torrens, with a registration type, with a Torrens property, you're not even in front of a judge. We have an examiner of titles that is basically the hearing officer. So, or if, we're doing eminent domain, we've got we're in front of 3 commissioners, right? And doing a hearing, trying to get our clients some additional value for the property that's being taken. So yeah, it's not jury trials or anything like that. For in my world, at least, if it goes to that level, I'm tagging somebody else in and they're handling it for me.
Got it. That's not your thing. You never wanted to do that. You said you like to talk. So, I mean, I would think you would enjoy that whole process of being in front of a jury.
I like doing deals. And what I like about doing deals, I think, and doing transactional law is, I'm a control freak, right? And I think you have a greater level of control over a transaction than you would when you're dealing with a jury, a judge. There's a lot more variables that you can't control, and for someone of my personality, that would just be maddening. So I like being able to, and the nice thing is here in, most of my deals, now I'm licensed in a couple states, but I'm mainly practice in Minnesota. And so on the transactional side, we lawyers see each other multiple times.
Yeah.
So there's there's civility. There's, it's kind of like it's not uncommon to have an all hands call and have attorneys and clients and everybody else on the phone and emailing back and forth and working together to get things done. So it's a different environment. It's not so adversarial. That's why it's funny when we run our conflict checks at the firm and they ask who the adverse party is. I'm like, well, there really isn't an adverse party, but the person on the other side of the table, this is their information. So it's not so adverse. It's more where both sides are kind of working together for a common goal. And I think that I just like that environment better than the litigation posture.
Got it. Okay. So that's interesting. So then how did you make the decision how did you even get started? Why did you decide to go to law school? You probably didn't think you were going to do this line of work. So how did you get there?
No, I was not one of those people that grew up wanting to be a lawyer or thinking they were going to be a lawyer. I come from a family of engineers, and I started going to school. I was at a school here in Minnesota in St. Paul called University of St. Thomas. And I was planning to go there for a few years, transfer to the University of Minnesota and get an engineering degree. And while I was at St. Thomas, I got a little messed up in politics. And it was my father, actually, who was an engineer, was like giving away his firstborn, said, hey, if you're going to mess around in politics, you might want to consider law school. And so I started looking into it. And I'm like, this really appeals to me. This really sounds like I want to do something. Now, it's funny that all these years later, I dabble in the political world and the policy world, but I hooked on to corporate and real estate law early on when I was clerking and just really fell in love with it. And I would take classes at law school, kind of those areas. Corporate finance isn't on the bar exam, but it was interesting to me, so I wanted to take it. Right, secured transactions, Article 9, not on the bar exam, wanted to take it. Right. So I tailored my legal education to the areas that I anticipated being, that I would be practicing in. And I just find that it just happened. It was very organic that I steered into that world and stuck with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. What kind of engineer were you thinking about?
It was manufacturing engineering. It was the St. Thomas had a graduate program in manufacturing systems, and they have number of engineering degrees now. That is not one of them.
Is that mechanical engineering typically?
It's like a combination of mechanical and with a little bit of electrical and throw in some business stuff. It was a brand new degree. I wanted to stay at the school. I knew that by the time I decided to do that discipline, I knew I was going down. The law school I went to, William Mitchell, is literally a couple of miles down the road from St. Thomas. So I knew I was going down the street already. Yeah. So it was a matter of let's finish out. Let's get the engineering degree. We'll get the 4-year degree, and then I'm heading down the street.
Oh, did you get an engineering degree? Did you actually?
I did.
Oh, you did?
I did. And the world is a better place that I've never used it. I went right down the street to law school. Bridges collapsed. Nothing blew up. I went to law school, became
well, I was a civil engineer. So that's why I'm chuckling at that, because I started out as an engineering student too.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. My dad was a civil engineer for many, many, many decades. So
Very nice. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that kind of appealed to me actually, but for whatever reason, I kind of moved away from that into business. But and engineering is a good background for
hmm
anything, right? The way you think.
yes, it is. It is. It is. And then I still think one of my engineering professors asked me, so what do you use your degree at all? And I said, I think that, I think transactional attorneys, sometimes we try to, we there's a solution, right? Just like in engineering, when you're dealing with science and math, there is a solution. And yes, I think in a way that sometimes we think the way we think in terms of processing, how we get from A to B to C. I think, yeah, I said, I think that I do use my engineering brain sometimes when we're trying to piece together. I said, I also have to use my algebra all the time to try to, when I'm doing these securities deals, and figure out, okay, if we're going to sell X% for this, what value are we, so I'm like, I always feel when I do that kind of stuff, it's like the old Saturday Night Live skit with Chevy Chase playing Gerald Ford in the presidential debate. And he said, it was my understanding there'd be no math. And then, it's kind of feel like that. It's like, yeah, there's no math in in law. What are you doing? Why are you using algebra? But sometimes you have to do it,
That's funny. I tell my kids, I said, trust me, you will use math your whole life. You always use
Yep.
math.
Yep.
It's a good thing to know.
Yep.
So it's
Absolutely.
interesting. So is there any I actually, I was in the real estate business for a while, and I actually worked, and we owned, at least the insurance company that I represented owned Butler Square across from the Timberwolves. You know the building?
Sure. No, well, yes. Yep. Yep.
And it was owned by the ex-chairman of Honeywell, Jim Binger.
Mm-hmm.
You know that family?
Yep, I do.
So
Yep.
I actually had the pleasure of doing that transaction with him, and that was quite an interesting one. So tell me about one of your best transactions or deals you worked on.
Oh my gosh. Here, I'll give you a series of them. I can't narrow it down to one particular one, but one of my niche areas that I've developed in the last little over a decade, about fall of 2009, I started doing this. Because I worked on my business side, I had worked with a lot of startup businesses, especially during the last recession, people that had been let go and they said, I'm going to be my own boss. I'm going to set up my company. And I'm still working with a lot of those folks today, which is pretty cool.
Sure.
But about 2009, towards the end of 2009, I had someone join the firm I was at the time, and we were going to partner up and work with startups. And he had a craft brewery client that he had just picked up, and they needed help. I mean, they were literally ready to have their doors shut. It was under the original ownership. The owner had not just guaranteed the loan, had actually pledged a second mortgage on his home. And we were daily running checks over to the power company to keep the lights on until we basically needed to find a buyer for the business. Found him a new majority partner and did all the legal work to, get this thing moved over to, kind of reorganized and restructured. And I found out that there was a lot of legal issues to dealing with a craft brewery. I'm like, we should go get more of these. So I have a large cache of craft brewery and distillery clients.
I saw that your background. I was curious about that.
Yeah. And so if I had to pick, I can't single out any one of them as the deal, but being able to work with that type of business and this hospitality businesses generally, where you can, years later go there, have a pint, have a cocktail, have a meal, and know that you played a role in them being there. That's really cool. That's kind of the rise I get out of doing transactional law. When you have a tangible business like that, and that's not to say anything against some of my, my other clients or other businesses, but that particular field, it's fun and it's hip and it's cool and it's fun to be associated with that. So if I had to say the deal, getting those folks opened, helping them to raise money, negotiating their leases, getting their entities up off the ground, helping them with their licensing, all those things, and knowing that they needed me to help is a cool thing.
Excellent. That's not you were telling me, I was trying to remember the brewery, which I thought was the best place I've ever been in my life, anywhere outside of Minneapolis, downtown, about a mile maybe not even a mile, like, and I cannot think of the name of it. They have a whole outdoor space. You'll know it. It's a gigantic facility with
Okay.
games.
Well,
And,
I mean, that's been a really cool thing, is this whole tap room movement. It really exploded the industry, and there were people that got into it that were otherwise not going to get into it, right? Because they didn't want to participate in the distribution system and do cans and bottles and things like that. So they wanted to do the tap room. And so we've got some really nice ones. I've got some really good ones. Brewery wise, we've got some really good ones, but also the distilleries have been big with cocktail rooms. I've got a big distillery client. They started out in Minneapolis. Now they've expanded into River Falls, Wisconsin. They actually bought up the old Shopco property in River Falls, Wisconsin. They're called Tattersall Distilling, and they're distributed in, I've lost count, but it's over 30 states. And I was working with them at the very beginning, and that's fun. I got another one that's
big one I'm trying to think of, though.
Are you thinking Surly? Maybe Surly was the big one that pushed for the tap room law, because they wanted to build a destination brewery with the beer garden and all that. And
are there other ones like that now?
There are, but there's also even distilleries like that. So I have a distillery client called O'Shaughnessy Distilling. They have a brand of whiskey called Keeper's Heart. They are right next door to Surly. So you literally can see the two from the other place. And they do what they call an Irish American whiskey. They're making their own whiskey here in Minneapolis, but that takes time. So what they're also doing, their head distiller has been at Jameson, Redbreast, the big Irish distilleries. They have a relationship with a distillery in Ireland, and they bring over the whiskey over in bulk over to their facility in Minneapolis, and then they do the blending here in Minneapolis. So once they change the character of the whiskey, they can't call it Irish whiskey any longer. So they called it Irish American whiskey. If you tasted it, it tastes like Irish whiskey, right? And they've got the pot stills and everything you'd see in an Irish distillery here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and they have a phenomenal cocktail room and a beautiful patio that, like I said, you can see O'Shaughnessy from Surly, and you can see Surly from O'Shaughnessy, and it's a neat little area to that.
No, I remember that fondly. I was there for a business trip, and I just sort of walked around, and I discovered this place. It's like, oh my God, this place is amazing.
Yeah, it's been a fun industry to be associated with, and now it's kind of bigger. Every little town wants to have their own brewery, or usually a brewery, but sometimes a distillery, which is how it used to be. Remember, back in the day, before there was refrigeration, every town had their own brewery, because you couldn't transport the stuff without it spoiling,
Right. Interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. Anyway, we're not even talking about the law, but this is a good conversation anyway. So let me ask you this. Having gone through it, what would be your recommendation for somebody that wanted to go to law school? What would you tell them, and what advice would you give them?
Well, I definitely would encourage people to go to law school. I think that, having a legal education opens a lot of doors for a lot of things, right? I mean, going to law school doesn't mean you necessarily have to go be a lawyer. You could be a lobbyist. You could end up, there's a lot of CEOs that have law degrees, right? So it's a good education. What law school does is it teaches you how to think with the Socratic method, and to this day, that's what I said that I've trained lawyers, and I've talked about marketing, and I said it's basically a law school exam. You're issue spotting, and then you have to figure out how to solve it, or if it's you or someone else in your firm that can solve it. That's what law school teaches you. So yes, I would encourage folks to go to law school. In terms of advice, in terms of a legal career, the number one thing, I'll give a couple pieces of advice. Number one is, there's a tendency for some younger lawyers, when they get their license, they've passed the bar, they're all set to go, and they immediately want to hang out their own shingle. I would advise against doing that if at all possible. I have always worked with firms, started out with a small firm, went to a medium-sized firm, and then now I've been at two other medium-sized firms. And as much as I think law school is a great education, I think that when in terms of training and skills training to be a good lawyer, I think you really need to add to that, to the legal education, some mentoring from other lawyers, particularly more experienced lawyers. I've learned a lot, both what to do and what not to do, from lawyers that I've worked with over my 21 plus years of practicing. And so if at all possible, hook up with a firm and take advantage of the mentoring. I'm at a firm right now at Chestnut Cambronne, where we have a mentoring program, and for the official mentoring program for the younger lawyers, but also there's always mentoring from for at any level. Any of our more senior lawyers are always willing to
That's
sit
great.
down with you over cocktails, in a meeting, over lunch, just in the office,
Yeah.
and have a conversation, and you really feel like they want you to be the best lawyer you can, and because that helps everybody, and you can't substitute for that kind of mentoring. And so that would be one thing, is try to hook up with a firm, doesn't matter the size, but get somewhere where you can, even if it's working with a solo lawyer as an associate for a few years, just to learn, to learn the trade.
Yeah.
That's a good way to get that kind of practical experience as to, how do you work with clients? How do you manage clients' expectations? The worst thing from a transactional lawyer, the worst thing that we can have happen is have the other side, the lawyer on the other side, have no client control. You've got to be able to, I think it was a line, I forget who said it, but it was I remember this from my professional responsibility course. Sometimes being a good lawyer is telling your client he's a damn fool and should stop what he's doing. So that one piece of advice. The other piece of advice, and I got this piece of advice early on in my legal career, from a partner who told me that the way to have financial security in this profession is to develop your own book of business. If you want to, if you, this is, we're talking about uncertainty in the world and in the economy and volatility. I have had clients that, through good times and bad times, I've been with them, they've been with me. When you have, we went through a couple of years of a global pandemic. I was a little worried because my practice is so heavily weighted in the hospitality industry, but all my clients came out of it better than before.
Oh, good.
So I think that that really, you want to get that experience of working on a lot of different stuff, and being the grinder for some years, to learn how to do things right, but learn how to talk about not only your own area but other areas, know enough to be able to talk to a person who's needing legal help, be out there, be accessible, and you'll eventually be able to become the finder in the rainmaker versus the grinder. So there's still that natural progression, but you really have to take a conscious effort and you have to want to do that. There's a lot of great lawyers out there, a lot of smart lawyers, tactical, tacticians, technical lawyers. But being able to bring in a book of business on a regular basis is how you have a voice in the overall structure and management of the law firm.
That's a different skill set. That's a different skill set.
It is. So, but that's really the key to if you're looking for financial security, that's really the way to recognize, to realize it in this industry.
How big is your law firm? It looks like a pretty big firm, and you do lots.
We're about 35 lawyers, plus or minus. We'll gain a few. We've always practiced smart growth. We grow when we need to, and where the needs are, versus just bringing in people for the sake of bringing in people and being larger. We're a mid-sized firm. We've spurned offers to be acquired or to merge with a bigger firm. We really feel that our culture and our ethic is one that we really want to be on our own. But at the same time, we have kind of a national presence in some areas. We have a very big class action practice. We're actually going back to our hospitality practice. We we're involved with 3 of the class actions involving the business interruption coverage for businesses being shut down by government during the pandemic. We're in the 3 cases where the insurer had no virus exclusion coverage in their policy, so we survived motions to dismiss. So those have been ongoing for a few years. We have a big estate planning practice, and I have a with my transactional practice, it tends to go beyond the boundaries of Minnesota. That's why I've been getting licensed in the surrounding states. I've got Wisconsin and Iowa now. South Dakota is pending. Probably get North Dakota too, so I can have the 5 states. But we've got attorneys licensed in about a dozen or so different states. But a lot of the stuff, trademark and things like securities are really federal areas. So I do a lot of equity crowdfunding under Regulation CF. So I've got clients that are, all over the country. And so for a quote unquote small firm, we tend to have a pretty large footprint. And I like that. I like being able to see the people I'm working with on a regular basis, not having to get permission from some other office, some other place. But we use technology and we use our skill set, and we service clients wherever we can.
Excellent. Good stuff. Good. Well, listen, this has been interesting hearing about your business. Well, just to wrap it up here, how do people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your practice and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can the firm's website, Chestnut Cambrone, and it's CAMBRONNE.com. My bio's on there. My email is jobrien@chestnutcambrone.com. I've got a personal website. I'm very big in personal branding, and I've got a blog site where a lot of my content, because I generate a lot of content written and otherwise.
Nice.
So you can go jeffreyobrien.today. You can find me over there. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. If you search for Jeffrey O'Brien, you'll find me. So would love to connect with people. And I really appreciate you giving me the chance to talk today. And I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh yeah, excellent. Well, it's good to have you. So once again, we'll wrap it up here, but we've had Jeffrey O'Brien from Chestnut Cambrone in Minneapolis. And this show is sponsored by Emotion Track, and we use artificial intelligence to gather analytics that people use for mediation and trials. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time with you today, Jeff.
Thank you.